All right, everyone, welcome back to the event. We are getting ready for our enterprise panel. But first, I want to remind everyone that networking is available at any time. But if you click through, you will be taken away from the main stage. You should be on the main stage, which is where we are now, hopefully, if you're seeing this. And please be sure to visit our sponsors in the Expo Center, which is our virtual exhibit hall. And now I would like to introduce another one of our sponsors who is helping us put this event on. I would like to bring up Prashan Shetty from Ayla Networks. Hello, Prashanth.
Hi, Stacey. How are you?
Excellent. Well, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Well, firstly, thank you for having us be a part of this event, and we're happy to be a sponsor today. My name is Prashan Shetty. I run marketing for Ayla Networks. And just a quick introduction about who Ayla is and what we do. We are an enterprise software company. We work with leading product brands, both on the consumer side and the commercial side, to securely and reliably help them launch connected versions of their products and accelerate their digital transformation programs. That, in a nutshell, is what we do. And our offering is a platform an IoT platform as a service, which includes the connectivity, device management, and application enablement capabilities, plus SaaS applications that enable organizations to achieve essentially three things: higher growth opportunities, more operational efficiency, and ultimately deliver a superior end customer experience. So some of our customers who rely on Ayla for their IoT initiatives include Kenmore, DeLonghi, Best Buy, Shark Ninja, Culligan, Nestle Water, Johnson Controls, and the list goes on, but I'm sure you recognize some of those names. So that's the quick intro about Ayla. Hope that helps. Nice to be a part of this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prashanth. And remember, you can visit them at ayla.com and visit them in the expo booth. And because we're just so excited about our sponsors, we also have our next sponsor, Matt Johnson, who is from Silicon Labs, and he is going to come on up and tell us about the upcoming Works With event.
Well, thanks, Stacey, and hello, everyone. I'd just like to say I think these are great topics here today, and we're proud to be part of this. As Stacey said, I'm Matt Johnson. I'm responsible for IoT here at Silicon Labs. And what I want to do is just give you a quick overview of our Works With Developer Conference coming up in September. I think this audience, shares our passion for the IoT and has a great understanding of the opportunities and challenges associated with accelerating the smart home. To help address this, we're going to host our first ever virtual developer conference dedicated to accelerating connectivity and getting things to work together and with each other across all the different wireless technologies in the home. This is a developer-led event. It's hands-on workshops by Silicon Labs, as well as many of our ecosystem partners like Amazon, Comcast, Google, Samsung, the HomeKit ecosystem, as well as others, including Stacey, who'll be there moderating one of the panels. So if you have an IoT development or planning one, I'd really encourage you all to attend. It's a virtual conference, September 9th to 10th, admission's free. You can register at our website at workswith.silabs.com or go to our booth at this event. So I'd like to personally invite you all to attend. Looking forward to seeing you there, and please enjoy the rest of this event. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt. I am ready to enjoy the rest of this event. We are going to bring up several of our panelists for our conversation about building out ecosystems in the enterprise. And I want to welcome, Pilgrim Beert, who is the CEO of Device Pilot. Hello, Pilgrim. I can't help it, y'all. I do the cheesy Zoom wave. I love it. We also have Ginger Smith from Honeywell. Hello, Ginger.
Hi.
See, I got someone to do the cheesy wave. And we have Irene Patrick from Intel. Hello, Irene.
Hey, hi, Stacey.
All right. So I am really excited about this one, just because I love the enterprise and I love thinking about how we can turn connected devices in the enterprise or in the factory or even in smart cities into an entire ecosystem of products that work together. I know this is a bold and crazy thing. So I want to start off by asking each one of you why we need to actually think about building our connected products as part of an ecosystem. So Pilgrim, we'll let you take it away. Oh, Pilgrim, I'm not going to let you take it away because we can't hear you. Still, okay. Pilgrim, I'm going to let you work on that for a moment. And if you need to leave for a second, we'll let you, and you can come back. Ginger, we'll start with you. Tell us why we need to think about building our products as part of an ecosystem.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, typically when you talk about partnerships and products within the ecosystem, it's all about how can 1 + 1 = 3. So what we've found and what I found is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And why I say that is because all of the investment Honeywell specifically is doing into Honeywell Connected Enterprise is all about a unified platform, which is all about IoT. So you see Honeywell investing big bets with Honeywell Forge. You see Microsoft doubling down on IoT, which is all about the connectivity. You see SAP doing the same with Industry Cloud. So I would say in this new normal where digital is accelerating, this is where the market's going. And when you leverage partnerships to make that ecosystem possible with connected products, it just gets you there faster.
Okay. And Irene, you have done a lot of research for Intel, just so much. So I'm going to have you condense this all down for us. Why do we need to actually think about building out ecosystems?
Well, I think there are two reasons. First of all, the complexity of the technology ingredients that have to come together for IoT solutions is more than we've ever seen, and many of those technology components are made by different vendors. And so when I, as a manufacturer, think about actually installing something or deploying something, I'm typically having to integrate across vendors and across very disparate technologies. And so the idea of dumping a box of Legos on the table just doesn't really fit very well anymore in these very complex solutions. And so I think vendor partnerships and integrated solutions have to come together in this world now.
It is difficult. All right. Pilgrim, let's see. Is now the moment?
Can you hear me now, Stacey?
I can. You're a little fuzzy.
Yeah, I'm a little fuzzy to myself as well. Well, I'll try and work on that. If you can hear me at all, though. Yeah, I think ecosystems, I think every IoT product is in itself an ecosystem.
Pilgrim, I'm going to make you not say that. It's too much for me.
Okay, I'll have another go.
Okay, sorry. It's going to be really good when we hear from him because Pilgrim has written about creating minimum viable ecosystems. Right. He's thought about this for a long time. So we're going to wait. But while we wait, let's move into practicalities. And from a practical standpoint, Pilgrim, do you want to try again? I don't know if you're like, oh, you're back. You're okay. We're going to move from Pilgrim for now. This is the fun of a virtual conference, but we're going to go switch to practicalities for a minute, and I'll have Ginger. How do you start building these things? This is literally your job, is to actually try to find partners to work with Honeywell and things that will add value to your customers. So how do you start that process?
So first and foremost, it all starts with the strategy. So Honeywell specifically, we are very vertically focused, so we can better understand our different customers in aerospace versus industrials versus et cetera. So each of these different groups has their own strategy, and then we link out what we're trying to achieve with the different partnerships within said groups. So I think having a clear understanding of strategy, where your technical gaps are, how you're looking to scale in particular markets, and what ways to leverage your strengths with other people's strengths as well is where a good start would be. Okay. One example, if I could quickly give one.
Yeah.
So traditionally, Honeywell, super OT focused. We have deep domain expertise in terms of, aerospace, hardware, et cetera. A lot of people have thermostats in their homes. We do a lot more across different industries. Last month, we had a partnership announcement with our inaugural strategic partnership for Honeywell Connected Enterprises, which is with SAP. And so why we specifically chose to do a partnership with SAP for HCE is because we're leveraging the OT that Honeywell already had. We're leveraging the domain expertise and the IT side that SAP has. And it was just kind of a match made in heaven to tackle these solutions that a lot of our prospects have come to us and said, this was a challenge, this being the visibility into all of our data across disparate systems and data fragmentation that we just didn't have the manpower to solve. So how can we do this? Because it's in the too hard bucket, but as a partnership, we decided to take it on, and that kind of sets the tone and the precedence for all the other partnerships and helps close the gap on both sides. So instead of just a 1 + 1 = 3, it's a 1 + 1 = 11 in this case.
Oh, your math is getting a little wacky there, Ginger. I don't know. So practical things, Irene, you have actually worked on the ecosystem side. So let's talk about things like who should be on your team, maybe, or actually maybe we should start with how do you find good partners? Let's start there.
So our work points to our work, the research that we've been doing, as well as our intel work with companies, really suggests that a partner, an ecosystem partner, is different than a vendor. A vendor is somebody you have a transaction with. It's a one and done. I buy and I implement and you leave me alone. An ecosystem partner really has to be helping create the vision. Has to be helping buy into the vision. So we spend a lot of our time working with manufacturers who we don't sell directly to, by the way. We work with them and their ecosystem partners around what's possible. Where is the technology going? What's possible with this technology, and how can we exploit it to the best of that manufacturer's ability? And so when we think about practical examples, the best way that we've been told by over 400 manufacturers and their ecosystem partners, the best way to pick a partner is, number one, to say, who's beyond slideware? Who can point me to examples of where their technology is actually being used? Who has experience with partners already? I mentioned that joint solution that with all these complex technologies, you really want to look for partners who can tell you what they've done, with whom they've done it, and where they've done it, and then can help you identify what makes you really unique. A one-size-fits-all out-of-the-box solution rarely is successful, at least to the ROI that people are looking for. So that's sort of practical.
That is super practical. Ginger, how long did it take you guys to do the SAP partnership with Honeywell? Because that was only on one segment of the business.
Yeah, so we're starting in the building space, super relevant with COVID, returning back to work. And this one, because we had the right people involved and we got along so well, our first workshop was in March and we announced in June. So that's relatively quickly paced, I would say. A lot of our other partnerships were in a 3-month turnaround. But I really appreciated what Irene said about not being vendors and really understanding what partnerships are, because SAP is a very strategic case. We happen to work really well together. We have the right mobilizers on both sides. But in terms of partnerships and the ecosystem and getting the right players involved across all of our newly formed HCE, which started because Darius wanted to invest in innovation roughly 3 years ago, a lot of people, when we say partners, they're like, oh, yeah, here's a supplier. Let's go make them a partner. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. Let's think about partners in terms of how we come together, about our go-to-market or our technology, and make it successful.
All right, that's 3 months. And later on, I'm going to ask you who was in the room, but we're going to give Pilgrim one more shot because I feel so bad for him.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, Pilgrim, you're lovely. Okay.
Excellent. I have no idea why that wasn't working, but I turned everything off and turned everything on again and it started working. It's just like IoT, isn't it, really?
I was going to say, it's like all computers. Just reboot. Okay, so we'll go back to the first question just because I want to give you a chance to talk about how you view the ecosystem and why they're important.
Great. Yeah. So I think every IoT, I mean, an IoT product is not really a product, it's an ecosystem in its own right. So it usually takes many different entities to bring an IoT proposition to market, technical ones, but also the user and possibly the sort of channel partner that owns the user. So a lot of people have to collaborate in bringing any one IoT solution to market, but also that solution, once it's into the market, finds itself alongside a whole load of other solutions that are appearing in the same place, in the home or in a commercial space or whatever, and it can add value to those solutions or get value from them in various ways. So I think there's lots of reasons why ecosystem thinking is a good way to go.
Got it. And just to carry on to that, what are the practical ways? Like, how do you actually set this up, especially because Irene and Ginger are both at huge companies. They could probably call anyone up and they'll be like, of course, we'll talk to you. Thank you. A smaller company, how do you think about that? How do you set those up?
Yeah, so it's about bootstrapping. It's about there's this concept that a friend of mine called Gaia Soikuk came up with, which is the idea of the minimum viable ecosystem. So a bit like Eric Ries's book, the minimum viable product, lean startup book. Because it's an ecosystem with IoT, what is the minimum set of players you need to get your solution to the point where you can at least trial it? And once you're trialing it, you can then start to go on that iteration with your users and start to do co-creation and so on. And you're sort of what you're doing then is you're looking to see whether it works. Do all the bits of technology work, but also does it work as a proposition? Are your do your customers find value in it, and will they pay you? And I think there are lots of types of value that a startup can get from a large company in that process if the large company is prepared to work with it.
Okay, so let's go to the people with experience at large companies and the research. Do large companies want to work with startups? What is the value? What are you looking for when you turn to a startup? And I'm going to go. Irene made a little smiley face, so we're going to ask. We're going to ask Irene first.
Yeah, we want to work with startups. As a very, very large company, are we effective at working with startups? I think we don't do as good a job as we need to, particularly in this space. Our studies suggest that technologists are looking for companies like Intel who aren't vendor lock-in specifically to help be a matchmaker with some of these startups. But the challenge really, there's a couple fold. Number one, how do I find them? How do I vet them? And then how do I really engage with them in meaningful ways where it's a win-win on both sides? And I'm sure Pilgrim will talk about this. It's really hard to find win-wins when you've got such a huge disparate size. And then the other thing is Intel is not as fast a company as a startup would be. So decision-making seems to take forever in relative terms to what the startup is thinking. So we work on different time frames, we work on different scales, and yet these startups, particularly around AI, are bringing exciting new technologies and algorithms into this space, but we need to find a better way to work with them. Pilgrim, you're shaking your head.
Oh,
yeah,
that's
nodding
true.
my head. I'm nodding my head, definitely. And I've been through this. My last company and how I first met Stacey was I started a company called Alert Me, where we built what became the UK's first sort of large-scale smart home platform. Got to sort of millions of devices, and eventually we sold ourselves to our largest customer, which is the UK's biggest utility company. And so that was a kind of 5-year journey from engaging with this big company, initially just in trials and so on, and then eventually, they adopted the whole not just the platform and the product, but the whole team and acquired us outright. And I think what made that work was that it was a gradual process. I think the things that startups are good at, which perhaps big companies are not so good at, as you say, is agility, risk taking, and so on. Obviously, if the startup can have de-risked it to a certain point and have some proof that the technology does work on a good day, and that users will pay something for it, even if you've only got 100 of those or 1,000 of those, that proof can be taken back to within the corporate decision-making engine to say, okay, this looks like it's worth, taking a bit of a punt on. But I think then to continue to use the startup as the vehicle for doing things in an agile way, iterating really rapidly, and not pulling it into the mothership too quickly, I think is a good way forwards.
Okay, and Ginger, at Honeywell, what are you guys doing, or how are y'all working with startups, or do you even want to? Or are you like, oh, they're too fast and crazy?
No. So I think it's kind of funny because fondly HC within Honeywell refers to itself as a startup, even though it's about $4 billion. So I think take it with a grain of salt, but that gives us a little bit more agility than a larger company would have. So for example, right now I'm already working with 2 startups. One is about 35 people. One is going through its last round of funding. I think what both of them offer is that they happen to play in similar spaces, but their capabilities are a little bit different, or it augments our roadmap, whether it's making us go faster or whether it's something that we don't plan to build, but the market's already asking for. So those are 2 clear technical ways of why we would partner. And then we're starting to vet out the sales because we happen to have some of the same prospects or customers as well. And that kind of puts the cherry on top of what the potential is. So I would say it doesn't necessarily matter if you're a startup or if you're a large company. It's all about what is that differentiation, what's the nuance you bring to the market, and then does it overline with our roadmap, with your roadmap, and then how we work together.
And how did those startups, how did you start working with them? Did you go out and find them? Like how did that come to be?
So it depends on the vertical. So we have 4 different verticals: aero, industrial, cyber, and then buildings. And so each one has their own approach. So I would say cyber and buildings tend to be a little bit more proactive and seeking out these startups and companies that we can actually partner with or would be a good fit based on what we've seen in the market. The others, they tend to come to them because they're a bit more historically ingrained. So what I would recommend to smaller companies is that either you let the market speak for itself and call you out. If you have that niche, then your word is going to start to get around a little bit better. Alternatively, I would definitely network, figure out who you know at the companies you think can combine with you for the 1 + 1 = 3, and then ultimately have the outcome you're looking for. And then the only other thing I would just add on all of this is I think it all ties back to the platform. So we're talking about partnerships and platforms, and Forge in particular has around 900 connections, so they can talk to pretty much anything. And I think that also makes it easier for us to work with specific startups that may have non-traditional software in play.
Okay, so because you have the experience doing the integrations for those 900 connections, or just because you have so many connections, they probably have something that works?
So it was a conscious, I guess a little bit of both. I think it's a conscious decision to make sure. OT tends to have a lot of different ways of communicating. So there's just this need to make sure we could continue to do that with the software play.
Okay. And let's go back to this concept of it's a relationship, not a transaction, because I think that's super important. And when you're thinking about building these relationships, where do they start? Who needs to be in the room where it happens? Well, Irene, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So because technologies are so broad, when you bring them together, you're usually dealing with different functional pieces of the organization than you might normally on a more typical project. And so typically one of the challenges is how do I bridge expertise levels? How do I bridge language? And we found through a lot of our work that there are some really important kinds of what we call bridgers. People within the company or at the ecosystem, it can be either place, who can really speak the language of the operating technologist and the language of the information technologist. Bridgers who have long-term experience, who can talk about developments over time, who can talk about how things have evolved. So those are bridgers over time. There are bridgers that do spatial kinds of bridging. In other words, if I'm a company, a manufacturing company that has multiple plants, each one of those plants brings its own nuances to the table too. And so you have to have people who have a deep enough understanding to understand some of those spatial nuances too. So those are the kinds of people you really need to have on your team, and you need to have them very early in the project scoping and speccing stages, because they ask different kinds of questions. They help you refine not just the technology requirements, but the business value you expect those technology things to bring. And the most successful teams, the most successful smart projects that are sustainable start with a really solid business value proposition that everybody understands, not just the manufacturer or the vendor, but that everybody really buys into and engages in.
Okay. And does that need to be from the top down? Like Ginger, you mentioned Darius, who is the CEO of Honeywell, was really behind this SAP deal, for example. Do you have, is yours mostly a top down kind of push, or do you see also pull from other parts of the organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. And it's all of the above. So SAP is obviously very strategic. The two CEOs met in Davos, and they kind of were like, "Oh, let's look into this." And so we did that, and we're obviously really excited about it. But there are other instances where maybe it'll start with our CEO of HC, which is Q, Villara, or maybe it'll start with the actual vertical GM. Or there have actually been other examples where a partner lead from Aero will reach out to me and be like, "Hey, I'm interested in this. How can we get the right players involved?" So as long as you have a clear vision, I think there's a lot of flexibility in terms of where it starts if you're not expecting it to be the strategic level right off the bat.
Okay. Pilgrim, do you have any thoughts on the people involved, or how you start, kind of where the impetus for this comes from for success?
I would definitely agree. It's important to have a sort of exec level sponsor, which often goes right up to the top, actually, because often large companies have made public statements to their shareholders of intent about getting involved in IoT in one way or another, and then they need to deliver it. So I think that's very helpful to give you a sort of following wind within the organization. And then it's very notable to me that in a lot of modern small organizations that are sort of digital first, they tend to have a sort of product manager type person who owns the whole proposition from beginning to end. They understand the business case, they understand technologies, they understand the customer experience and everything. And I think finding someone like that within the large company and the small company, really, I mean, they'll both think in very different ways, but if they can share those same sort of values, I think they will help bring everyone else together.
Got it. Okay. And then let's talk about value, because we really haven't gotten to the money part of this, but the reason you create an ecosystem is because presumably you can't do it alone. So what are the challenges involved in turning an ecosystem play into something that actually does provide value? And by value, I mean cold hard cash or ROI. And we can just start naming challenges. We'll go with Ginger just for surprise factor. I haven't started with you in a while.
Wow. So this is actually the case right now with a partnership that we're looking at, and it's starting in HCE, but we're trying to get it to a certain value level. So we're thinking about bringing in hardware, or what that full picture looks like. I think in an example like SAP, $6 billion addressable market is kind of a no-brainer. But when we start working with some of the smaller customers, it's about making sure that that clear vision isn't just a one-off event. It's not just going to be for shipyards or something small. It has to be for a sizable enough market. And I think that there's ways you can be a little bit flexible in terms of the ultimate size, and not everything has to be a ridiculous number. There are some opportunities that maybe they're going to be $1 million, whatever the case may be, or maybe they give you entry into a market that you didn't have entry into. So I would think of it like a college application. It's not just about your test scores. What's your essay? Did you interview well? What sports were you in? And then we tend to look at that entire package.
And that's a good point. For Honeywell Connected Enterprise, a $4 billion company, a $1 million market opportunity is maybe not like, oh yeah, let's put on the effort to create this partnership. Whereas for maybe Pilgrim, I don't know if he would poo-poo that. So he's like, bring it to me.
Sorry, my eyes were lighting up.
So Irene, let's talk about, again, finding the value, and then also maybe apportioning value among the players, which I think gets really interesting.
Yeah. So that's where I was going to go with this, Stacey. I was going to say, my whole theme is you can't deliver, very few vendors deliver a full solution. It really requires hardware, software, orchestration. A lot of different things have to come together. The real challenge becomes, particularly among companies that are very large and very small, is who is really delivering that value from the customer perspective. And so who's willing to pay? What are they willing to pay for? And so that's what I call harvesting value. How do you harvest value? And then the question is, how do you share that value across the supply chain when you have everything from commodity components, which are critical enablers, but aren't all that sexy, and then algorithm developers and databases, and there are a lot of things that come together. And the thing that I see in IoT projects, and my own company struggles with this, I'm sure others do also, is that delivering value, harvesting value, and then sharing value are not very well appreciated yet in the IoT solution space. Because it's not as obvious in the IoT solution space as it is in some other kinds of spaces.
That's true. Pilgrim, have you figured out a way to solve this yet?
No, I think it is as hard as you guys have both been saying. I think, yes, on a fundamental level, you've usually got at the beginning of the value chain, you've got device manufacturers who like to sell things with a pure product model. And at the other end, you've almost always got a service provider who likes to sell things on recurring revenue. And so at some point, there's a bit of a dislocation in the money that ripples down. And we see this all the time in amongst our customers at Device Pilot. And people are constantly trying to work out, how much value they need to pass down the chain, how much they can keep themselves, what sort of business model they should have. And there's a fundamental transition that often goes on with IoT, where particularly if product companies get into IoT, they start off with a product mindset, and then eventually they end up in a service mindset, but it may take a long time sort of to get there. I think one of the interesting things about startups working with big companies is that big companies already have a number of really interesting business models with their customers that they might be able to leverage to make all this stuff work. So they might be able, for example, to bundle the new offering with some other stuff they're already selling, if they're a telco into a home or whatever. And so they don't have to just do a really literal sort of making the thing pay for itself on day one in the way that a startup might have to, because a startup can't afford to subsidize things or cross-subsidize things.
Any other thoughts on getting paid and sharing money?
Okay. I would just quickly add, I think there's no one size fits all. It's all about what works for you. You can have it be where you purchase items and it's discounted. You could have it be rev share. It's all about what's going to work. So I would be creative and figure out how it helps you, like Pilgrim talked about, kind of the ramp period. If you need dollars on day one, how do you get creative there? Or if you have more of a 6-month ramp.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions. If you guys have questions, let us know or drop those in the comments under the stage. And then I would love to talk, and we're kind of talking about some of the challenges. Oh,
before we leave that last topic of how do you share value and how do you apportion it, one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough in some of these partnership agreements is how are you going to audit? So, I collect revenue. Well, in a rev share, I have to know who's selling what and when and how and to whom. And some of these auditing mechanisms aren't really well established or clear yet. And we tend to audit things we can count. Those aren't always the most meaningful measures. And so we struggle with that as a product company who is very used to being paid for a thing. It's much more difficult to do rev shares when I have to think about how am I going to audit with partners, what metrics am I going to use, what metrics fit at different phases of a project. That's really a challenge.
Ooh, there's a good startup idea. I'm throwing this out there. Figuring out auditing, like an audit wizard. Okay, and that's a good challenge. Another challenge that I think is really important to talk about is all of this is predicated on these integrations and data sharing. And we have been hearing for decades, maybe not decades, that data is the new oil. It's so valuable. So the question is, how do we take this thing that we feel is so valuable, but really isn't unless it's normalized, processed, and turned into something useful like an insight. How do we share that in a way that makes everybody feel comfortable is probably one question, and then there are others. But we'll start with, how do we share that in ways that make people feel comfortable? Or what do y'all think about that?
Well, one way you could think about it is, I mean, from a personal point of view, we have this question becoming more and more relevant, don't we, about the things we share with big companies and what they do with that, and are we being monetized? And I think the answer to that is reciprocity. You know, I am giving you some things of value. If you give me some things of equivalent value back, then it's fair. And I think the same can happen within IoT value chains. You know. Insofar as there is data flow between parties, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be money that flows in return. It can be, you know, it could be access to market or all sorts of other somewhat intangible things that help the ecosystem actually work.
Oh, my focus on money. What am I thinking? All right, Ginger, data.
This is a more functional answer, but we obviously tend to involve legal quite a bit. So I think one of the pitfalls I typically see early on is you start to have these technical conversations with partners and people get really sensitive and protective of their data and their product. So obviously we always put an NDA in place prior, but then it's about asking the right questions and making sure you're not trying to ask for algorithms or something that's going to be proprietary. And from the get-go, you have a clear sense of what's the vision again, and then who owns the data, even if you both have the ability to see it and share it for that higher value customer outcome.
Okay. And do you make provisions? I'm curious about provisions for pulling back data and to extricate yourself from these. I know everything is golden and perfect, but you know, Irene brought up auditing, and I'm just thinking worst case scenario, you have joined this ecosystem, you're working with these players. How do you think about pulling back? What is your
So I'll take that from a cybersecurity perspective. The likelihood that a small ecosystem player would go into bankruptcy is higher than a very, very large company. It can happen much more quickly. What happens to their servers when they have to dissolve? What happens to some of their contracts or some of the maintenance you would expect them to be doing from a security perspective? My experience, at least in the industrial space, and I'll speak specifically in the industrial space, is that companies believe that a lot of their secret sauce around competitive advantage around processing is really embedded in their data. And there's a deep concern that if I share my data with you, I'm going to expose something that I really don't want the world to know. And then if I share it and you're a small company and something happens, I don't know what all of the processes and practices are that you're going to use to safeguard that, particularly once again, if you go into some kind of a financial difficulty or bankruptcy. And that's a serious issue that I'm sure other sectors deal with, but the industrial space seems to be particularly concerned about the usefulness of their data to infer competitive advantage.
That is scary. All right. Any thoughts on that?
My last company, AlertMe, we were a startup, and then we had this big utility company that ended up being our largest channel. And customers were sometimes worried about, well, what will this big company do with my data? Because, you know, we had lots of really sensitive data from the home. And actually, we ended up being a buffer because I know that the CIO of the big company, the last thing they wanted was a whole load of sensitive data in their servers where all they could do was lose it, you know. So they just didn't want it, and so we ended up being a buffer to effectively make sure that stuff never did touch their central servers, and so it solved a problem for them as well.
Now, you at AlertMe, there's an interesting case where you had other customers and then you were bought by one of your customers, which then made you abruptly have to pull out of some of these ecosystems.
Indeed. Well, since it's fairly obvious that must have happened, I suppose I can talk about some of it. So one of our other big customers was Lowe's in the States, and we powered something called Iris. And when it became clear that we were being sold to someone else, they decided that they would regain autonomy by basically moving their customers over to another platform, which was, I think, SmartThings. But that took a while, obviously, and it took a lot of engineering, and we had already committed to doing that engineering if necessary to help them essentially move the gateways and everything else over to this other service, which is a really significant amount of work. But we'd always done it. We'd always worked with them on the basis that we would do that if necessary, and they wouldn't end up having to doorstop their customers' products.
Okay, so you had an agreement up front. So when we're starting to think about putting these together, we need to think, yes, we should get the lawyers involved and come up with a ripcord. Is it a ripcord I'm looking for? I don't know.
Sounds good.
So, okay. Well, y'all, thank you so much for being part of this session. We are going to now move to our break. And at 10:50 PT, we're going to ask everyone to come over to the sessions tab. And there you'll be able to choose between a consumer-oriented how to build a connected product or a how to build out ecosystems roundtable. And you'll see some of the same faces plus more in each of them. And you'll be able to ask your questions, and it's going to be amazing. So go visit our sponsors in the expo booth or take a shot at networking, and we'll see you back at 10:50.